Welcome to this Setting It Straight. Today we have Aisha, the president of the DSU. Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you.
Tell us about yourself. What are you studying? What year are you in? All that jazz.
Yeah. So I'm in my 5th year of applied computer science with a minor in political science. And I'm in I'll be graduating this year.
Oh,
so,
congratulations.
Yay.
How excited are you for that?
Very, very excited.
Oh, that's awesome. So you, 5th year, you almost graduated. You got any crazy plans after your graduation, or have you been too busy with the DSU?
I don't know. My sister's getting married in June.
Wow.
So planning her wedding. But beyond that, I have no idea what I'm doing with my life.
That's fine.
Completely.
That's probably everyone's in the same boat at this point.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Is it older sister, younger sister?
Older sister.
That's awesome. How much older?
Yeah. 4 years.
Is she your only sibling?
No, I have 4 siblings in total.
Oh, wow.
Younger sister who's also graduating this year for medical science.
Wow.
So that's going to be cute. And then my younger brother is in grade 8.
Oh,
that's an age difference right there. That's crazy. Were you guys always close as a family? Were you all your siblings? Because I'm a family of 4 as well. Kids are four kids, so we sort of get in each other's throats really, really easily. Is it the same with you guys?
Yeah, you have those family dynamics where some of you guys gang up on the other ones. But I think me and my little brother are probably the closest. He's the cutest little intersectional feminist. He understands racism and sexism and the world, and so it's really fun talking about politics with him and what's going on in the world today and getting his perspective as a 13-year-old. And oftentimes I say he's smarter than most university guys. Really understands consent culture and what it means to be a guy and what privilege looks like. So it's super cool to talk to a 13-year-old boy and be if he can get it, everyone else.
He doesn't have to unlearn all this stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think it's growing up with sisters, because I have
That's
2
true,
sisters,
actually, yeah.
and so do you.
Mm.
It's so much harder to do the stuff that we talk about that happens on campus, because you think man, I could be my sister. You know what I mean? And that once you grow up with that mentality, it completely changes you because you understand what it's like more.
Yeah.
You know, I feel having sisters, so if you have a sister and you're still doing stuff to being sexist, assaulting people, it's just it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's crazy no matter what. But
it's how do you not make the connection between that could be your sister? Imagine if that was happening to your sister. How would you feel?
Yeah, and I think women definitely have value outside of being related to you in any way, shape,
Yeah.
or form. But yeah, I think having strong role models that you grow up around, and so they're able to be a living example of what a person of that gender is, so you see them existing as opposed to just picking up things from media, because I think media plays a huge role in shaping the context of what we think or what society thinks a woman is like, and so often objectifying women in movies and TVs and media plays that role into having where men think they have power over.
Yeah. And also, with growing up, you are so often clicked away into kind of gender groups, and so being able to grow up with a sister is that's whenever you do most of your learning in those pivotal years, where you are most likely away from all the rest of the people that aren't your gender. So it's nice to have that kind of fundamental learning going into high school, and then when you start kind of socializing with everybody.
Yeah.
Do you
Role
find
models and representation?
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
Do you find you've sort of taken the role model position for your little brother?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
More than your sisters, or sort of you guys all share the responsibility?
Yeah, I think we're 3 different individuals, so I'm sure he gets different things from all 3 of us. But I really like teaching. I'm really into sharing knowledge as I learn it and gain it. So I'm always talking to him about things I've just recently learned, whether it's in class or just through lived experiences. Whenever I'm able to pick up a hard idea and understand it myself, then I make sure to go explain it to him and be what are your thoughts? And often I learn as much from him as he learns from me. So yeah.
That's cool. That's cool that you're still learning from your 13-year-old brother.
Oh, 100%.
That's true. That's one thing that I don't take for granted, is that the youthful so the ability to welcome new ideas constantly. That's one thing that I've definitely, in the past like few years, I've been like more like, okay, this is how the world works, and I've lost that childish sort of creativity and that sort of like, you know what, the world is magical. The world is for the taking. For like, it's not, I don't have to like work this certain like line that I'm on.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely like take a page of a child's book and really explore it.
Yeah.
No, kids are so great. I love kids of all ages, and yeah.
Do you work with kids a lot, or?
I don't as much as I want to, and I think after the DSU, definitely getting more into hanging out with kids. I like go to everyone who has like kids now, and I'm like, let me know if you need a babysitter. I would love to babysit.
Pro bono.
Yeah.
Hey, they might have something to do after you graduate.
Yeah.
Hey,
Wow.
Teaching kids to code or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe.
New program in Halifax coming near you.
We'll see.
Is this your first DSU job or role?
No. So I guess last year I was a night manager, so I was in the part-time staff for DSU. And I've been involved in the DSU since my first year here
really?
at Dal. Yeah. So I've done orientation week throughout, from being like a first-year student to being an O-week leader for 2 years, then being on O-week committee, and then being president. I've sat on all the various different committees, from student life committee to help like plan different events, to sitting at the table for a restorative justice review that the university did, and was a representative for the DSU. And then I was also part of various societies. I started my own society. I was the president of the Dalhousie Arts and Social Science Society. I started the Black Indigenous People of Color caucus, BIPOCUS. So yeah, I've like been part of student life the entire time I was here. I think extracurricular activities and just like being engaged in student life is such like a big, meaningful part of the student experience here at Dal. And, you know, I spent my first year very like into academics, and I had like a 4.24 GPA.
Wow.
That's
in my
amazing.
first year.
That's like the usually the opposite comes true. The first year is usually the worst, and then you build up.
No, I was the opposite. So my first 2 years were like really good, and then I just like went downhill from there because I just
That's
got
when you
so
got
involved.
the DSU.
Yeah.
That's what happens.
Yeah. And I think like you learn so much in the classroom, but you also learn so much from your peers and so much from engaging with student life. And I think last year I was part of a group of students who ran Dal Do Better, where we asked Dalhousie to do better around their racist interim president that they hired. And I think
Nice, yeah.
that like took up so much time and energy, but it was also so rewarding, where we were in the media, we were like doing sit-ins and protests. I was also part of the tuition increase that happened, and the students doing a sit-in in the president's office for like a week plus, and like being able to like engage actively and demand action for students in ways that students want to see these impacts was so cool. And then I guess like getting into the DSU presidency was just like the next step.
The
from
next
there.
logical step, yeah.
Do you find that the position was helped you achieve those goals that you've been doing for the past 3 years? Like was that like that helped you achieve the support for students, the activism and all that better, or was it sort of deterring because of all like the politics and stuff?
I think it was interesting. Like I think definitely my passion is like working on the ground with students. When I was doing like Dal Do Better, I was like right in the midst there with the students. I was like talking to folks, getting their feedback, posting on social media, like engaging with students like right on the ground on a particular issue, and like updating folks as things came out and like moving forward. And my only mandate really was that like small interest group of folks who like were like, hey, this is an issue. And of course, understanding that it has broader impacts across. Peter McKinnon was sexist, racist, homophobic, transphobic, didn't believe Indigenous people had like any rights or value in academia. And so it was like a very, touches on many things, but not a lot of people understand that when you have a president or when you have a figurehead who holds these fundamental beliefs, that will trickle down into the way the institution makes decisions. And like politics is very, very interesting in the way that like the people matter, so do the policies, but so do like the people. And so like playing those two sides was really interesting. Around tuition, I was involved from when we started that around we just started with it was petitions. So folks were just like signing petitions saying, hey, like we don't believe tuition should go up. And then we were able to collect over 1,000 petitions that we hand delivered to the vice provost at the time. And then we staged a sit-in, and the two demands we were asking for was a new budget, because the budget just increased tuition by over 44.4% for international students, using them as cash cows to pay for the university when we know that the university talks about like we love our international students and they bring so much, and we're able to like globalize the experience here, and also recruits them actively, but at the same time is using them to fund the institution when we know that or I believe personally the government should actually be paying for a lot more of education, and so those are kinds of situations that you find yourselves in. And so I was able to just like actively be on the ground and support the students who were doing that work, and taking it from just like petition collecting to, okay, how do we actually get to the Board of Governors and engage with the people who are actually making these decisions? How do we make our voices most heard? How do we like amplify what we're saying? And so that was a lot of like on the ground work. And so now the DSU is very much like, in the ivory tower. You're invited to all these different tables and like decision-making bodies, but you're just, a student, so you're very like tokenized as like, you're the student voice. What do the students want to say? And when you give them the answer that they're not necessarily looking for, they're like, okay, thank you very much. We've consulted the students. Now go back to your go back to your place, and we'll go back to ours.
So it's more bureaucratic and less actively. Is that disappointing for you, or?
I think it's like interesting to like learn the way institutions work. I think beforehand it was like being on the outside looking in, being like there's something fundamentally wrong with our education system. There's something fundamentally wrong with the fact that we are hiring and paying $30,000 a month for a racist to sit in this position and be like the figurehead of the university. There's something fundamentally wrong with charging international students so much money that they already pay in differential fees, and then increasing that by 44.4% because the university can't figure out another way to create money. While we're also paying our administration way too much money. And so it's often just like, knocking on the doors, being like, how is this a thing, A, and then how do we change it, B? And then being on the inside, it's like, oh, now I can see the way the institution works. I see how decisions are made. And unfortunately, change is very, very, very slow in these institutions. And where students like cycle in and out every 4 years, 5 if you're like me or taking extra time. These institutions have existed for many, many years and will continue existing for many, many years. And so they don't have that same urgency that we do as students, where we're only here for 4 years and then we leave and we just keep cycling out. So seeing how decisions are made at that level, it's like, 10, 15 years is what they're thinking about.
Right.
And then often it's like the things that impact students on the ground should be part of those conversations, but often aren't.
What sort of things would those be?
So I guess I had like a meeting yesterday with some students and one of the VPs around supporting Indigenous students around what's happening with Wet'suwet'en. I don't know if you guys know too much about. So the illegal state violence of Canada, and trying to build pipelines there for the purpose of commodifying the land and using it as like a resource. And so we were talking with the VP about how we can create student supports for students on the ground here today. And so they were talking about we're like in the process of like hiring these different positions that will support people, and then they'll do these things, and it's like very much like later on, but it's like actually we have students here today who like need mental health support. Our Dalhousie's mental health services are improving, but there's still many gaps, including like a cultural competency piece where folks aren't able to get the supports they need when people don't understand the lived experiences they're coming from. And so being able to kind of talk about, okay, the university has a plan for hiring these 2 new positions, and then everything will be like, solved in their mind, but it's like actually hiring like 1 more staff person to support Indigenous students is a great thing. Like we're moving in the right direction. And so oftentimes I'm in those situations where I'm like, understanding now that institutional change takes a really, really long time, I'm able to be like, okay, yes, this is like moving in the right direction. But at the same time, I see the students who are here today and who are suffering and who need like support today and who aren't going to benefit from that like 5 years later support that like will come in, and maybe we'll also have some issues later.
And is the institution moving in the right direction, do you think?
I mean, students are definitely holding it accountable to do that. And I think we as students play a huge role and often underestimate how much our voices play into it. I'm often told every single time I go to different spaces that it's like the students' voices are what people will listen to. But then the students sometimes often don't understand how the institution works. And so to actually bring students' voices in a meaningful and effective way is like a challenge that I think the DSU should be addressing, and is like, that's the work that I'm trying to start doing at least to then build up for the next few years.
Is there a way that students, just any normal students, could make institutional changes, or does it have to go through other people? Well, I guess everything in an institution has to go through other people, but is there any ways that they could actively kind of participate in this change?
Yeah, I guess like, so like maybe let's take an example. Like, you know, we're working on like food security, we're working on mental health, we're working on like tuition, we're working on centering folks on the margins and having a more like equitable and anti-oppressive understanding of education and institutions. So I guess, is there any issue that you folks are interested in talking about? Maybe I can like lead you through the cycles of how I think change can come about.
Actually, mental health support, like in residence specifically.
Yeah, okay. So with mental health, you have the mental health sits under student affairs. Student affairs, provost is Ivan Joseph, vice provost Verity. So Ivan doesn't actually deal with the mental health stuff, it would be Verity. So under Verity, there's the whole department. David Pilon is the head of that, and he's super great. But again, one individual cannot change a whole institution. And so issues that you come up with first is funding. Are we getting enough funding there? And so what can students do to advocate for more funding? We physically cannot give them more funding, right. But we can participate in, you know, when the budget proposals come out, actively engage in that process to ensure that funding is going into the areas we want. Now, budget consultation has now changed since last year, because we actually asked the university to change that, because before they just like show us the budget and be like, here you go, and we'd have like absolutely no way to change that, as we saw with the tuition. Not our ATM tuition campaign there. And so to actively engage with the budget, you'd have to be involved from like day one, from when they're creating that budget. And so if you're just a student who, you know, goes to mental health services, isn't getting the support you need, or you know, get turned away. I know previously they used to have like, you have to show up and book an appointment if you wanted a day of appointment, and sometimes you'd like miss out if you weren't there at 8 a.m. So you'd have to like leave. And so yeah, so the way the resources are allocated to that is like a whole other process that's like has nothing to do with like David and like the center's ability to do their work. And then you said mental health specifically for residences. So then you'd have to create a program. And so first they'd have to like do an evaluation of like what is the need. Then they'd have to do like a cost analysis benefit, or like, you know, all those committee work to actually figure out if this is something people want, if it's cost effective, if it will make a difference in their metrics. And so I know right now they're really struggling on getting an understanding of what like the student experience metric is, because you can, you know, do a survey and figure out how many students come in and how many students go out and who uses them, but how do you talk about the student experience as a whole, and how do you get that feedback and make sure we're using that as like one data point to then influence the way our services are being done. And so right now they don't have a way to do that. And so the DSU and some great work that the VPSL is doing is the mental health forums, where folks meet once a month with David Pilon, Ruby Coles, who's our lovely, lovely VPSL, and students come together to talk about mental health at Dalhousie. And so those conversations do make a difference. But then again, you know, you have to figure out, okay, where resource allocation, what is the priority? And at the same time, you're also doing all the other things that like already exist. And so like that upkeep and that continuous flow of, you know, people coming in, people going out needs to be taken care of as well. So, yeah.
What would you say to a student who's looking to get into the DSU, into like I guess president? What would be the kind of the responsibilities that they should kind of establish before going to that, or the roles that they should take on before?
Yeah, so I think like getting involved in student life first and foremost. If you've like, whether it's like a society, whether you're on like committees for your faculty, whether you're like a teaching assistant and you're like engaging, I think somehow engaging with student life outside of like academics, and outside of, doing things like for yourself per se, but really like giving back. If you're in a position where you're giving back to students, then you're able to like see the vital role that plays in our student experience, and then you're able to like get those, get the experience that you've brought and then bring that to the table, which I think is important.
I would like, because we've been on the topic of the DSU, I'd like to talk about you. I don't think a lot of people know who you are. So far you've told us about your siblings. Did you always grow up in Canada?
Yes, I was born and raised in Halifax.
No way.
Yeah. Grew up in the pubs and then moved to Fairview when I was like 11, 12-ish.
Cool.
Yeah.
And like, what are the pubs? I'm not from Halifax.
So pubs are public housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that was like, yeah. Is that like short for Hubbards or something? Hubbards?
I honestly have no idea. But yeah, pubs. I think it's pubs, public housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you grew up in Halifax, in the area, so you really know what life is like in Halifax and what the people in Halifax are going through. Do you find that experience has sort of helped you and shaped you to do your role better on campus? Because you're more in touch with like the community around you?
I guess like maybe a bit more about me. So my parents are immigrated here from Ethiopia way back when, in like their 20s, I think. My dad went to like high school at Sackville High.
No way.
And they both studied at St. Mary's. So they came as like, I guess, my mom as an international student for St. Mary's, and then my dad came a little earlier than that. And so we're originally from Ethiopia, and we're ethnically Oromo, which is like the indigenous people of that like East Africa Horn area. And so our family history has also dealt with like colonization within Africa, which I think is like a really interesting topic, because we speak about like indigenous people here, and I like love thinking about like indigenous people across the world having like dealt with that like colonialism, and how like for the Oromo people, the Oromo language was banned for like 200 years as like a means to get them to assimilate into the language of the general populace, and as a way to cut them from their culture. Seems to be a common theme right there. And then like here in residential schools, we know that they weren't allowed to speak their language, and so like losing language is a way to like cut you from culture and cut you from knowing who you are and assimilate you into your people. So I think that's a really cool perspective that I bring from like my own family's.
Did your parents know the language at all?
Yeah. So my parents,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So my parents can speak Oromo, and I can also speak Oromo.
Oh wow, that's so cool.
It was like one of their big points was like teaching us how to speak our language, and like they knew the connection it had to culture.
100%.
And so I remember when I was growing up, all the kids always getting like the new things. I think like Nintendo DS's were like a big thing, and like Tamagotchis were things like throughout the years. And my dad like did not get me a Nintendo DS, and I was like, Dad, everyone else in school has one. I am lame. No one else. Everyone else is playing these games. I have nothing to do. And he was like, Aisha, I took you back to your homeland to see your culture. None of those kids got that opportunity, because I also grew up in like a big like immigrant Muslim community, and he was like, those kids didn't get those opportunities, but you did, and like that is my priority for you. And as like an 11-year-old kid, I didn't understand that, and I was like, but I still want my Nintendo DS.
Oh my god!
And I'm lame, and no one wants to play with me.
But in hindsight,
but now I'm like I
that's so cool.
Gone back to Ethiopia maybe five-ish times. So I got to like, engage in Oromo culture and see like Oromo people and like see a whole different world. And it's cool. I think there's a difference between like just going to a different like country and like seeing it versus like going back to where your roots come from and being like, these are my people and this is the land where my history comes from. And so that was like really empowering and cool.
That's so
to see.
cool. I couldn't agree more with you about language.
Yeah.
My dad immigrated. He was a second generation immigrant to Canada, from Lebanese, and my mom is first generation immigrant. So I'm like somewhere between second and third. I'm not really sure.
2.5.
Yeah. But my mom they always try to speak Arabic at home, so I started to read and write and speak. And it's one of those things where I want to make sure that my kids know Arabic. Not only because it is such a beautiful language that just has like it's such a friendly language. There's words in there of blessing, of like kindness that don't exist in the English language, and they're just good things to know. But also because knowing the language helps you connect with people from your own country. And there's the easiest way. You hear Arabic, you're like, my friend, like Habibi, like immediately. You don't care who they are, what they look like. They speak Arabic, you're best friends, like no questions about it. And that sense of community, no matter where you are, that's what I want my kids to have, 100%.
Yeah, and I think like language plays a huge role in like human communication. And I think thinking about like what concepts and what knowledge we can like communicate with each other is like a huge thing I think about often, where English is often so limiting for me, because I'm not able to like piece together like what I'm like trying to explain. For example, I don't know if you guys know about Arari the subcat.
Yeah.
She's here every Wednesday, 11 to 1, in the sub lobby. But her name Arari is actually an Oromo word. The way you pronounce it is Arari. And so it means peace. But it actually doesn't just mean peace, because peace is just like such a standstill word. It means the process of peace has been completed. And so you've done that reconciliation and then you're at peace.
Oh, wow.
And so oftentimes when like, me and my siblings are having an argument, my mom would be like, okay, it's time to, Arara Mukabna, we have to like make peace. And then we like go through the thing and then we've reached peace and then we've Arari'd. And so
that's so cool.
It's like being able to understand different concepts or different processes. I'm, a computer science student, so I always think in like processes and like logical steps and different things. And so being able to talk about, thinking about like reconciliation or like making like peace and like what is our like vision for an equitable future for the world, something that I love thinking about, and I'm always trying to like figure out.
Daydreaming.
Yeah. And so language is like, so limiting in some senses, but then when you go back to our own languages, we're able to like pick up concepts and contents and see what's important, and our values can be so derived from the way we speak about the things, ourselves included.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's so cool that you're like that the language is still a thing, because there's nothing that pisses me off more than people who come from Lebanon and they lose the language, and I'm like, come on, man, that's like the easiest thing.
And it's hard. It really is hard.
It is. I don't blame them at all.
Yeah.
Like it's more of like the parents sort of like get too busy and stuff. It makes sense. So your parents immigrated when they're like young, like really young. That's that's hard. What did your parents do after they graduated?
So my dad graduated with a chemistry degree from St. Mary's, and then he couldn't find like a chemistry job-ish in Halifax, but then really knew that Halifax was like a good place to like raise your kids, and like we had like there was like a really good community here back in the 1990s, early 20s, and so he decided to stay here, started a driving school. And so we had a little mom and pop shop driving school that they ran. So, working for himself means we didn't get any like, health benefits or like all of those pieces, which is like unfortunate. But, he definitely provided for us, and that was super great. My mom actually had to drop out of school because of all the kids she had. And so she made the choice to like prioritize us as what she, does with her life.
Absolutely.
And so I'm so grateful for her.
Yeah, no, 100%. My mom did the same with us. Well, her and my dad sort of worked together on everything, but she homeschooled us. She taught us everything, and like I to this day don't know how she knows so much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%.
Are you close with your mom?
Yes.
Yeah. I definitely need, like, I call home like once a week, but there's nothing that my parents don't know. Like, it's one of those relationships that I've always tried to maintain. Like, 100%. If I have a question, my parents probably have the answer. That's cool. Are you close with your siblings still now that you're like sort of disconnected in that way?
Yeah, no, I definitely, love my siblings, love my family. I think, one thing I learned at university, going through all these things is like the importance of family and how having that is so critical to like who you are and like, always be having like a place to go back home to. And I think for me, home isn't like where I grew up necessarily, but home is like my family.
Same.
And so
100%.
That space for me. Yeah.
That's so cool. All right. So do you feel like sort of you've used your cultural sort of knowledge and the way your parents raised you in, like, do you feel like it's integrated well in sort of Canadian society, or do you feel like there's constantly a clash between your culture and your values that your parents ingrained in you and Canadian culture?
Yeah, so I think like having grown up with two cultures in front of me, and then also throwing into the mix my religion, Islam. So like three different like value sets, really, when you think about it, about how, what life is, how to go about life, what is important, all of those pieces. And so I think I'm able to like examine and like, see the situation. See the situation that's in front of me and then be able to kind of decide from these like three different sources of like a solid like value set of like what actually is like important to me. And so sometimes that is like clashing with what my parents would necessarily want for me, or clashing with what Canadian society would deem like of value. And sometimes, whenever I've made the wrong choice, I can tell because like I instantly feel that, like that guilt or that like,
Right.
like, oh, this was, you sacrificed a piece of yourself to fit into Western society. And next time I will not do that.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I know what you mean. And like, because I moved here like 4 years ago. I'm still like basically fresh off the boat. And there's still every now and then I realize something about myself that is only like still very new. But there's definitely like, if you talk to like Sam was one of the first people I met when I first came to Canada. And if you talk to him about what I was like and like socially and then what I am now, I've definitely, a lot of me has been chipped and replaced and to fit in and to adapt. But yeah, I've always followed that with my religion, my culture. More recently than ever, I realized I have to fall back on that because when you're sort of in a position where you have to like learn from your environment, I always find I have to fall back on those sort of the values that I was taught. And like, okay, what is most important to me? And the fact that our parents were religious, were also culturally involved and very like strong people. I think that genuinely helps you in every aspect of your life. It's really cool.
Yeah. And like, one thing that I'm always like really curious about or like daydreaming, as you said, about is like the equitable future and how do we like exist today and how do we like as individuals work towards creating that, whether it's, as the DSU president and with all the institutional power and like access I have versus if you're just like, a student trying to like get through school, like how do we all actively contribute towards that? And so I think in those hard situations where I'm like, what actually is right? What is the right thing to do? I fall back to like, thinking about like my little brother and like kids and like, go back to that, like, okay, what would a kid do in this situation? Or what would a kid think is important or like valuable? And how do we like actively engage with that and not make compromises that you make as adults for things like money or time or fame or clout or what have you not, and instead do like the right thing. And so I think that plays a part in it. And then also being able to, pick and choose from like the different cultures. Like I've existed in like two different mindsets or like worldviews, the, Oromo Muslim, second gen immigrant here, and then like, the Western Canadian society that I like grew up and lived in, and like this is my home and like I know no other home than here. And I've existed in this society my whole life. And so being able to see those two, I'm often able to be like, okay, actually this choice, you can play up these values or you can play up these values, and trying to figure out where you want to fit in or what you want to do. And then, yeah, I don't know. I like fundamentally believe money isn't real and time isn't real. And so therefore, like, what are we doing on this planet when we are building pipelines for money when money actually isn't real and like the planet is real and we're like destroying that. So, yeah.
I guess the argument could be the earth has life, money does not. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
it doesn't. You're fighting
Yeah.
over an inanimate object when there's literally
Yeah.
living and breathing life all around you. So how have you used your like sort of value base, or like your priority, as you can fall back on those priorities, for an equitable future? What is an equitable future for you, and how has that structured your decisions and all that you've done in your presidency?
Wow, the ultimate question, Chad, you've asked me. What is an equitable
We've been warming
future?
up for like half an hour. And now we go for the harder ones.
This is the boss battle.
Damn. An equitable future. Well, I think... this is actually so hard. Oh my God. An equitable future is today's society and a place where we exist, where we have reached Arari. So we've gone through that process,
like
and
that.
we've gotten to the peace. And that, I think, is grounded in our historic reality. And I think that's a really important piece for me, where it's like the world has gone through so much fucked up shit. Like so much, from like residential schools to concentration camps, to colonization and the Industrial Revolution and all of, sexism and like women not being able to vote or not having any value in society other than like being an object that you're traded between men to make pacts about land and animals and stuff. And so I think grounding ourselves in that history that we come from, and then being able to be like, okay, what comes next for humanity? And how do we actively play a role in that? And so, me existing and breathing every single day, I'm actively playing a part in like creating the future. And so how do I decide to exist in a world where my goals aren't make as much money as I possibly can. My goal isn't be as like popular, as like well esteemed as I possibly can. My goal isn't like, trying to further my personal career at the disadvantage and at the expense of other people. But how do I actively create a world where, 20 years from now, I can look back and be like, yeah, I like did the right things. And I can like look at my little brother and be like, yeah, I did the right things. And,
That's
I
hard.
tried.
That's
Yeah.
a lot harder said than done.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I look back like 2 years. I can't confirm. 20 years, that's a stretch. I'm 21, and I guarantee you, by the age I was 1, I did not do anything right. So, okay, I'm going to try and summarize that. Basically, you're trying to build a future that first corrects the wrongs from the past, and then makes the future more fair in a way. Is that a fair summary, or like a...
Yeah. I think like correcting the mistakes of the past would automatically mean that we've came to a solution where we're able to move forward.
Right.
So it's like correcting the mistakes of the past and moving forward
So it's correcting...
into the future.
Okay.
And like continuously, because like, there are like so many problems like climate change. How the fuck are we going to solve that?
I don't
like,
think anybody really knows.
But that's,
Yeah, it's
that's
crazy.
where we should all be putting our time and energy and resources.
Yeah.
Not building pipelines, but
Yeah.
like solving it so the world
Right.
doesn't burn.
All
So,
right.
yeah.
I think I understand what you're saying now. And so with that in mind, how has your presidency been? Did you say because it's wrapping up in the next few months? Would you say you've done that well?
I've done the best that I could have done.
That's all you can really say.
Yeah, and I think I've learned so much about like I was talking about like institutions earlier and like the roles institutions play, but also like the influence an individual can have on an institution. And oftentimes it is like yelling into the void, I feel like, where you're held to like, there's like all these like different moving pieces and different people. And there's like, hundreds upon hundreds of people play out or like have a job to play at the university, whether it's like their actual job or like they're like a student trying to get their academics and, learn stuff. And it's like, what influence can I have on shaping that? And so I think I've been able to like pull from a lot of my past experiences, whether on like societies, whether involved on campus. I was like a teaching assistant for like 2 years. So like really pull everything like I've experienced, and then move that forward into, okay, this is like the role of the president, and this is the role of the DSU, and this is our mandate. And our mandate is to like support students through an anti-oppressive framework, to ensure that student life is thriving the best it can. And so using all the knowledge I have, on filtering it through what actually physically can be done, because, you know, I can't just come in and be like, okay, everyone, the world's better now.
I fixed it.
Free tuition.
My assistance.
I've done it. It was all me.
I wish. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, and so I think like filtering, like what I'm working on right now is a 5-year strategic plan for the institution. And so a lot of my job has been like consulting with students. I'm like having those like on the ground conversations, and really figuring out like what are issues students care about and what does the DSU's power to like move forward. And so as of right now, we have like 5 priorities so far. They might change, but like what they are right now is, you know, mental health, food security, our education, centering the margins. Can't remember what the 5th one is.
Well, that means it's going to change. So don't worry about that.
Yeah. And so then being able to be like, okay, what is like achievable like in the next year? And then what is achievable in the next 5 years? And like, because like, you know, power doesn't concede anything without a demand, and power doesn't concede anything without like an organized demand. And so how do we as students first figure out what we want, figure out what we're actually able to like change in this institution, and then work towards slowly like building towards something, you know, and it's going to take time. And so how do we like align ourselves so that we're like, this is the goal in 5 years, so what can we do today, and what can we do this year, and what can this executive do next year, and like how do we push the needle forward constantly? That's the work I'm doing.
Is there anything that you tried to get done, but for whatever reason, whether it be institutional interference or otherwise, that did not happen, and that you encourage further years to explore?
Ooh.
That's if that's a hard question to answer, then you did a good job.
Yeah, I guess like I came in wanting to like shift the culture, and so I think I've like succeeded in that. Like we came in, we did the things, and I think the direction and like the trajectory of the DSU has been changed this year. And so I think that, you know, understanding how different pieces play into it and like getting into the nitty-gritty details is like what the strategic plan is, and like what that constant engaging with students is to like move us forward. But I think, you know, my goal at the end of the day was I want the DSU to be like a student hub for students by students, where we're able to come together and have these conversations about like how do we better the student experience here today, and have that be the priority. Yeah.
Better the student experience. Yeah. Do you feel like you've done that? Like, sort of made the environment on campus better through, I know you did the fries thing for the O week. I had to learn that by heart, by the way. I was an O week leader.
Yay, O week, get involved.
You've did the restructuring, so that I talked to Ruby a lot about that. We can go into that detail a little bit later. You worked a lot with administration on the new sort of liquor sorting way, or the method of like licensing. You've worked on after that you guys did a mental health clinic up here in the sub, and what are some other things that you've done to achieve that, just so people know like what you've been up to for the past year?
Yeah, so at Senate, which is the academic governing body of the university, we are in the process of introducing the New Deal, which is a whole suite of different like reforms that have to do with the building a relationship between student, faculty, and staff, engaging in the institutional wrongs the university has been a part of and how to like fix those, and then bettering the overall student experience in the classroom. And so that's like institutional change, which, you know, we started this year and will like continue on through the various subcommittees to the committees to the voting and like all of the politics that play out there. But we've like started that conversation there.
Cool.
And so I think that's really cool. And so we're like, leaving a package of, leaving a package of the reforms themselves and the policies and like where they should go and like who you should talk to like move them forward, and how you like do coalition building and how you like garner support within the other folks who have like a voting power, and how you get people to buy into the institutional changes you're trying to do and like move those forward. So I think that's really cool around our like student academic experience. Food security. I think we've done so much this year around food security. So over the summer, we moved our food bank from like a small storage closet to a whole bigger office there. And then we've like been in the process of like fixing up the way we we get the food, students access the food and like serve it. We have much.
It's honestly so good. I used it all summer. I was not in a good financial position after school finished last year, and the DSU's food bank literally fed me for months. Like it saved my life, genuinely. I have so much praise for that, because even when it was still in the smaller room, it was all I needed to get by. It was exactly how much I needed. Really good job on that.
Yeah, and we're seeing like so much more students accessing our food bank, and so we're able to be like, okay, like food insecurity is an issue on our campus, like is an issue, and we know students can't succeed academically if they're actually not able to sustain themselves physically, and so that's been like a huge project that our member services coordinator has taken under.
Do you find that there is a lack of education of what food insecurity is? Because I know a lot of students who sort of come from a background where it's seen as almost that there's like this social stigma about it, and they're like, I've eaten like Mr. Noodles on a regular basis, and it's like, I'm like, but there's a food bank, you have food there. It's like, yeah, but like, I don't really need it, I got my Mr. Noodles. There's almost like eating Mr. Noodles on a regular basis is not a healthy diet. No. That I would consider that food insecurity, because you don't have the proper nutrients, you don't have the proper like protein, like all those like elements to a healthy diet. So I the one thing that the conversation I had, because I talk with the food bank all the time, I'm like, guys, it's awesome, it's free food, you don't have like a veggie that you need for your meal, jump in there, grab a veggie and go. It's sort of, people don't understand what you're supposed to be eating, because they're usually fresh off like the parents taking care of them, they have no idea how to cook for themselves, they're just like, Mr. Noodles, it tastes good. It must be real food.
Yeah.
I wish there was more education on what that means.
Yeah.
Because a lot of my people I've seen around campus do not eat well.
Yeah, it's really great that you say that, because like we're currently in the process under our VP Academic and External, bringing together all the different folks who work on food security at the DSU. So it's like the farmers market, which sells produce at cost, and so you're able to get like local fresh produce at the same cost that we purchase it.
A week's worth of veggies is like $20.
$20, yeah. You can order a box, and
amazing.
It's like all packed for you. You just
Insane.
pick it up. You can get a mini, or you can get the like large size. And then we have our sustainability office, DeSuso, who does like breakfasts on Sexton campus. We have Loaded Ladle, which serves food 4 days a week, and like we're expanding on
Tuesday to Friday, 1 p.m.
Yeah.
Best time of the day.
Wow.
I know my thoughts. I get a lot of. I'm a student.
You
I don't get any money.
So we're bringing together all those different folks who like touch on food security for our students together to like work on creating a food security campaign. So that is actually currently in the works as we speak. And so we're trying to figure out how we can pull relevant data from our student body, as well as like pull data from like the greater Canadian like context around food insecurity, because I think that's an issue that like impacts us as students, but is also like a issue within the whole city, where minimum wage is so low, the cost of living is so high, and so oftentimes people have to choose between paying rent or paying your heat and power, especially in the winter, versus getting like healthy, good, nutritious food. And so we're working on like starting up a campaign. I don't know if I'll see it in my year, but we'll definitely like leave all the notes and like different ideas together so that the next cohort of DSU exec can like take that on and really create it into something cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm gonna head out.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Swap it?
Travis, you wanna? Cool.
Yeah. So, I sort of want to talk about what you've been doing. I want students to know what you've been up to, because I think the biggest problem with the perception of the DSU, and you especially, is people don't know what you've been up to.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's not enough like positive media like things about the DSU. That's one thing for sure. So that's really awesome about the food security. What else have you been doing?
So another initiative kind of on the ball that's like not getting that too much attention. So coming out of the Not Dal Bound campaign, where the tuition increases happened for international students, we've started the process for creating the first issues policy for the DSU. So issues policies are really just any sort of policy that touches on an issue where students have like an interest in. And so that the DSU is able to take a stance on these issues moving forward, or like advocate on them. And so we are in the process of creating the first issues policy, which is the International Students Issues Policy. And so that came directly out of the Not Dal Bound campaign. Students were like, oh no, out of that campaign, Dalhousie was like, we don't really care. We're still increasing tuition. Sucks to suck, y'all. And then students were like, what do we do now? After that happened, after the Board of Governors vote happened, and we were like, hey, what you can do is take all that like energy and knowledge and like experience you folks have and put it into an issues policy where now the DSU is mandated to actually do this work, because beforehand the DSU wasn't actually mandated to do the work.
Okay.
And actually, interestingly enough, the DSU took a different stance than students were taking at the time. I think it was like about like regulating fees, whereas students at the time wanted like, elimination of differential fees. And so that's like one piece. And right now we're in the consultation phase. So they've written the policy. That was like over the summer and fall. They've written the policy. They've like gotten it all into like the legal policy type language. And now we're working on moving forward with like consultation. And so that's going to be something we're like calling out to students to like get involved with. We're going to be presenting to the various international student societies on the different pieces of the policy. We're going to be holding like a town hall where students can come and engage with the policy and get their feedback in.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So that is, I guess it's so hard to really do a lot of like big things in 1 year thing. So you're doing a lot of setting up, which is all you can really do. I find that one thing about the university experience is that it's so short. Yeah. And then there's so little time to make change in the 4 years, when if the administration is looking at 15 years. Yeah. I've always found that if you want to make the most change, you have to change the regulations and the policies. Yeah. Even though that takes a little time, but it takes less time than to create an institutional change, right? It's sort of that every student who comes after you has the same message, and so they can keep the fight going. Once you change the sort of not just the conversation, but the way of like what we're teaching our leaders, or what we're teaching the students who are involved in the DSU, for example. So they come in, they read sort of like the files, they read all this information. They're like, okay, I know where to keep going when I left off.
Yeah, and I think like one thing that is like systematic issue of the DSU is that every single year new execs would come in and it would be like a wiping of the slate, start fresh again. And everyone does their, we have like O week, which is like in the mandate of the student life VP. You'd have completely blanking on all the things we do. No. We definitely do a lot.
Well, like the internal works for the societies.
Yeah, like working with societies, doing the ratification. So like all the different pieces, everyone has their like portfolio. And so it often just becomes, you come in, you have no idea what the DSU does. You spend 6 months trying to figure out all the different things. You have like admin emailing you every single day being like, come on this committee, come on that committee. And you're like, I don't even know what anything is to be on a committee. Like, and by the time you learn it, you're 6 months in. And then you're like, oh, I only have 6 months left. And then you start doing work. And then you're like, oh, no, there's like 2 months left. And I'm leaving. And they're already doing elections. And no one cares about me anymore. And I'm just like, are
you talking about the point you're in right now? All right.
So I think really, again, like thinking about like structural systematic change. And I'm really into that as you know, when I think about like the equitable future, and like the work I want to do moving forward, I think like systemic change is like where that's at. And if we're not doing systemic change, then we're just like in the same cycle, and we're just like running around in circles.
Right.
And so this year, really hammering on to folks to do like a good transition report, to stick around for transition, because some execs last year didn't stick around. I personally didn't get a transition at all.
Oh, wow.
I got like an empty computer, few random files in cabinets, and no idea what was done before.
Especially when like the DSU is held to such a high standard of that's a high expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And you just
and I think like often if you don't shake things up, or if you don't you know, I'm someone who challenges the status quo constantly.
Good. Yes.
If you're not doing that, you're able to just like fly under the radar, you know?
Mm-hmm.
If you keep things business as usual, it's business
Right.
as usual. No one's going to say anything. But it's when you come in and start changing things up that people are like, ah.
Do you feel like that's been like the hardest part of your experience? Because you have changed quite a bit, and probably for the better. That's what I want to talk about next, to clarify. Because I think people have a wrong notion on why you've done a lot of things that you've done this year. Do you feel like that everything that's happened, the controversies, they've been for the better good? Like they've been a good decision that you sort of don't regret doing?
Yeah, so I guess like from the DSU perspective, everything we've done like makes a lot of sense. And you know, I speak a lot about like having been involved in the DSU for 4 years. Like my sister was president 2 years ago. I was involved with the DSU since
What was your sister's name?
Amina.
It was before my time, but I went through previous execs. I was like, I think I might recognize this person, but okay, that's awesome.
So Erin Prosper, before Erin Prosper was Amina, before Amina was Kathleen, before Kathleen was Dan Nicholson, and so that's kind of the legacy of presidents that I come from.
The avatars.
And yeah, so I've like been involved and like in the loop of the DSU for those 4 years. And you know, I remember telling in second year, I remember telling my best friend, like, please never let me run for the DSU presidency
I
or
said
anything.
the exact same thing. I don't want to get involved in student politics, and I'm getting involved in student politics.
Yeah, I was like, don't let me get involved. If I ever tell you, be like, nah. And then, yeah, she told me, and I was like, oh, whoops.
I'm graduating 2 months. It's too late.
So, yeah, so, like, I have, you know, that very close experience with this institution as a student body. And then also having done, like, the advocacy work of, like, asking for better for students at the administration, at the faculty level. Having had students come to me and be like, I'm struggling with, like, XYZ, what do I do? And having to like support and help them navigate. Like, you know, a lot of students take on that like peer support, and we're often not recognized for that when we have students who are struggling, whether it's, you know, accessing the sexualized violence policy, or getting accommodations for like an illness, or, you know, accessing food. Like oftentimes our friends are our biggest like supporters through that. And so I've always played the role within like my friend group of like helping folks navigate the institution, and always had people come, you know, to me when they're having like these problems throughout the year. And also like being, you know, presidents of societies, having started new ones, having been part of old ones, sitting on various committees of the DSU, I've seen the way this institution worked. And so coming in for me, it was about, okay, how do we make this body that has a lot of resources and a lot of potential, how do we maximize that potential?
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about like what happened with like the Grawwood, and like kind of like from your perspective behind the scenes? Because I know there's a lot of like controversy behind it, and the public kind of was like upset. Can you just give us a little rundown?
So we restructured the DSU in June, and so that was really to, again, like maximize the impacts of like the structure of the DSU. I talk about like structural change a lot, and so how do we create an institution that is able to like do the work that's like student facing? And so we created 2 new positions, one a brand new position, the director of research and outreach, to do those points of like researching issues, outreaching to students and engaging with our student populace, and then being able to bring that to like
constantly shift that like strategic priority of the DSU to make sure like we're relevant to our students. And then the other position, director of operations, would be in charge of running like the overall operations of the union, including our bar services, including our like contractual agreements with, you know, the health plan, with like space agreements that we have within the sub, our like Chartwell's contract, so like all our food. And so really just keeping like the day-to-day operations there. And then the rest of our departments are like one person departments. So our like member services department is our member services coordinator. Our policy department is our policy and governance coordinator. So really trying to figure out how we can create those like supports within the staffing structure of the DSU, to then support executives first and foremost, because it's their mandate to be doing the work of creating the work of the DSU, and then ensuring that our like staff have also that support to then be able to like come together, as opposed to like working within like silos or like all working in various tangents. Really bring the DSU together so we're able to like focus on our like anti-oppressive mandate of like providing supports for students. I often explain the DSU to people as like the Band-Aid solution to the student experience. You don't, you know, if you're living your best life, if your daddy's paying for your education, if, you know, you have a nice apartment and, you know, parents are helping you pay rent and, you know, giving you money for like food, you're like, you know, chill, living your life, going through academics, like, yay. But then there are students who don't have those like privileges, maybe can't afford to pay for food, maybe, you know, maybe have experienced sexual violence, maybe are dealing with profs who are creepy in some way or another, you know? And so when you need help, you come to the DSU. And so if you don't need help, you don't necessarily need the DSU and like the services that we provide at that level. But if you're being, you know, academically penalized for something, you know, and you're like, I don't know where to go, you come to the DSU. And so our services are like, you know,
Right.
food bank services, our DSAS, Dalhousie Advocacy, DSAS, Dalhousie Student Advocacy Center, I think. Yeah. Abby does great work. So all these like resources and service, you know, this Survivor Support Center, all these like resources and services we have are to like catch folks when they fall through the cracks. And that's like what a union's like
Right.
job is. We catch the people who are falling through the cracks, because, you know, Dalhousie is supposed to be providing us with an education and all these things that we need and like should be like supporting us. But when they don't, where do students go? And so the student union is that response to that student's need for support.
I just want to run back
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
So I remember you, like, I saw an article here where you're talking to the Gazette, and you're basically saying you want to be able to connect students better with, like with the power, like, with DSU and with higher up. And I'm just wondering, like, when those 3 employees were let go, did you think the communication with the student body was as well as it could have been, or do you think there was any ways that you could have improved? Because when I found out, it was just through like seeing on Global and whatnot, like actual like citywide news. So do you think there was a better way to communicate to the student body when that change was going through?
Yeah, and I think communication has definitely been a big piece of like, how do you communicate with 19,000 students when we don't have access to an email other than sending out emails once a month, which the university gives us permission to do. Otherwise, we don't actually have like email lists of folks. Social media only gets you too far. If people follow you, then they're connected. If not, then they, you know, how do you get them to like follow you so they're able to like be kept in the loop? And then when folks ask like specifically like our official communications and our like official governance, so that is our council minutes, which are, you know, our council is the highest decision-making body at the university. At the student union, sorry. I'm like held accountable to them, and so is like every other DSU executive, and so those students represent all the other students who come from various either community groups or faculty level groups, and so that's where like our official communications comes out on terms of like what the DSU does. But no, there's definitely huge gaps around like how we can like better communicate with our students. And I'm like constantly trying to figure out how we can like do that better.
I guess we might have a new solution, the podcast.
Yeah, I would love. Honestly, I've been telling everyone, I was like, someone help me do a podcast, and they're all like, yeah, and I'm just like, no, let's do it.
Funnily enough, Travis, I don't think I ever told you this, but me and my roommates talked about having podcasts for a long time, and then you came up to me during O Week,
Yes!
and you were like, I'm starting a DSU podcast, you're
Yes.
the host of it, and I was like, Julia was gonna be the other host.
Yeah.
I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then I started taking my head for a few months, and then I quit my job, and I was like, I'm starting a podcast, and I dragged Travis along, and I dragged Sam along with me. But yeah, the you're probably one of the two people who got this going. My roommate actually coined the name for this, the show, and then you're one of the other person who was like, probably we'll just do it on campus. I was like,
We're supporting your quarter life crisis.
yeah. It's like, yeah, I'm just gonna throw my money out and jump into this. But yeah, the podcast would work for communications. A lot of people were really upset about the fact that Craig and Greg were such experienced like employees. And there's a lot to say about the institutional knowledge that wasn't being shared. But did you consider that their experience as as something when you were letting them go?
Yeah, and I think we took this was like a very like big decision, and like we did not take it lightly, and I hope students know or can see or can try to understand that we did take a lot of consideration came into like these decisions that we made, and a lot of like weighing pros and cons and trying to figure out how to make different things work, and how to really do the things we want to do. And change a structure and like work towards like building that equitable future, and then work within the system that already exists. And so, yeah, a lot of consideration was taken into it. I think we did, I think we did what we did. I've learned so much from this experience, and there are a few things I would do differently if I could go back in time. But yeah, I think, I truly do believe the DSU is better off for the changes that we've made, and I think students will maybe not today see those changes or see those benefits, but I think in time that will come.
What do you hope that they'll see?
At the DSU?
Yeah, like with the changes that you're saying that are going to kind of like down the road, what do you hope that they'll see?
I guess like maybe an understanding of what the DSU is, and like I explained that like band-aid solution to you folks, and really having the DSU be like a hub for student advocacy, student engagement, student life, being able to I think students have been historically the like catalyst for change across so many different boards. All around the world, students are often like the first folks to come.
Oh. Can I help you?
Hi. The next one I thought I could organize here, but it's okay. Let me go to another place. I'll be on air next few minutes. So most of the time I used to get organized here. But since we are busy doing something, I can use the other space.
Sorry about that, man.
It's alright.
Cheers.
Sorry, where is it?
Interesting.
I think like students have been so powerful in like changing so many things across the world, whether it's like the civil rights movements in the States, whether it's the Arab Spring uprising that toppled many dictators in the Arab world. Students have been that like first sign to be like, hey, we can actually build a better world. We can actually be the change we want to see in the world. And so my hope is that the DSU becomes that hub for students where there's the support, there's the, ambition for, and there's like the call to action for students, where students can come forward with issues and then be an active part of solving those issues. And like by building community and by coming together, be able to like tackle and like come towards solving those problems. And like, I think, there's so many problems in the world. There's so many things going on. It's like, I don't think any individual person can be the hero to come sweep in and save us all.
It's like a tool.
But yeah, it's a collective, and it's being able to like come together where it's like you have a part of this solution and you have a part of the solution, and by bringing our skills and our knowledge and our expertise together, we're able to like move us forward.
Yeah, so I agree. Even a lot of people I've talked to within the DSU, so I agree that the way the DSU was structured before, it didn't make much sense. In the way that information was being passed around, in the way that there was a high dependency on key people in the organization, and then that responsibility of roles wasn't distributed well. I see why. That totally makes sense. What were the unexpected sort of happenances that came out after that?
Okay. So alcohol. I
hate the word by now.
I think I was the exec working probably the most on it in various ways. I don't think any of us expected the situation to blow out in the many ways it did. And so when the restructuring first happened, we, as the DSU, closed down the bar for a bit just to make sure that we had everything in shape so that we were able to open it, move forward, and like actively know that everything was fine in terms of figuring out all the pieces, supporting, whether it's like supporting staff and like getting policies. So, okay, to explain, there's the university liquor license.
Yeah.
And so the DSU has always been under the university's liquor license to this day.
Yeah.
And so when anyone says we're going to lose our license, it's like, actually, we're not going to lose our license because it's the university's license.
It's
we've
the
never
ability to use it.
Yeah. We've never had a license to lose one. So when everyone's like, oh, no, we're going to, I'm like, no, this is not a thing that can actually happen. You can't lose something you don't have. And so we were under, or we are, still are, continues to be under the university's liquor license. And so pre-restructuring, the licensed designate, who is the person who like does the administration work on the license itself and like, signs off. Have you guys ever run an event where you had to like wanted to serve alcohol and you had to get your forms filled out and all that stuff? So that goes through like many steps, and like the final step and sign off is the license designate being like, cool, you've fulfilled all your paperwork and all your duties, and your bar staff are trained, and you've like acquired alcohol in the appropriate manner, and like your event is all safe and good to go. Final sign off would be the license designate. And so during the restructuring, the license designate position was affected in the DSU, where it no longer existed as the general manager, which is where that license designate responsibility was. And we were hoping to move it to the director of operations, because they're taking on that like those responsibilities, and their job is to like maintain like the safety and like all of those pieces. And so when that happened, we were like in communication with the university. They were aware post restructuring. They were like, we were, chatting about the different pieces, and like that came up. And so they were like, everything seems fine. We just have to bring it to the alcohol advisory committee to make that final like decision. And we were like, cool. What does the alcohol advisory committee want to know? And they were like, they just want to know how we're going to like ensure the separation of power between the person managing the bar and the person like overseeing the license sign off. And we were like, cool. Here are the various options that we can do. And they were like, cool. Bring it to that committee. Then we bring it to that committee the next day, and then the committee's like, nope, we will not be doing this, and we are taking the license designate from the DSU and giving it to the university. And so that was like a decision that, in our conversation with the university beforehand, they were like, everything is fine, everything is cool. And then at that committee, they were like, nope, psych, never mind. We're taking that license designation. And so I think that was a critical piece in the situation as followed. They gave the license designation to the manager of the
U Club.
U Club, yes.
Janice Tate.
Janice Tate. And first of all, that is like a huge conflict of interest in terms of our competitor, active competitor for the Greywood and Tea Room, getting the license designation. And yeah, so that was just like, okay. And then we were like, working through that. We were like, university made that decision. It's their license. They get to decide, yada, yada. But then we started running into like serious problems to the point where also miscommunication. And I like would like to blame the university for a lot of this miscommunication because they weren't communicating with us. They weren't communicating with students. They weren't communicating with societies. And so the process that used to exist of approving events to go through had to go through the same process for students, or like the same-ish process for students, and then would come to the DSU, and then the DSU was just like one other tick on the box to then go to the licensed designate, who is now manager of the U Club, and processes were changing every single day. Mm-hmm. And I was like CC'd in many emails where there was one email where we got a form and they were like, this is a new form we're going to be using for this event or this process. Can you let us know if you have any feedback by tonight? Meanwhile, we have all these other things to do. The director of operations has a whole other job outside of just me being on the alcohol portfolio. And then when we asked the university for clear communications on what the changes are and what they want to do, they're like, there are no changes. This is the exact same process. Wow. And so that's where we were like, okay, you literally asked us for feedback on a new form you've developed for like how to accurately go about the process of getting an event approved. But then you're telling us there are no changes when we're like, hi, students have been asking, what are the changes? We're also very confused as to what this process is. How do we get our events approved? And that created a huge backlog of paperwork. And I don't think anyone was like expecting this. I don't think the university was expecting this. We definitely weren't expecting this. But that huge miscommunication and just like lack of communication meant that we were approving events day of. And so I was, many of the DSU exec would often, it would be a Thursday, we'd run over to the manager of the U Club's office, ask to get these forms approved for events that were tomorrow. Now, if you're a society,
that's ridiculous,
and you're running an event that you've planned months and months and months ahead, and you have no information, you have no idea what's going on, your paperwork is somewhere, whether it's at the university club, whether it's at the DSU's table, whether it's at the Greywood, you have no idea what's going on. And you're like, can I serve alcohol at my event? Like, I don't know. And so that was like extremely frustrating for students, and like rightly so. I would be extremely pissed if I put an event together and then I like couldn't know what was going on with my alcohol service. So we, throughout this process, we were continuously like engaging with the university because we like have those like seats at the table to like talk to different admin, and like Ivan Joseph texts me and we have phone calls at like 9 p.m. and I'm like, I would rather be doing something, anything than talking to you right now, Ivan. We went through the process of, going to the alcohol advisory committee being like, hey, and this is like all through like letters that we like wrote to them. Being like, hey, we're confused about the process. What is going on? Please give us some information. Students are confused. We're confused. What's going on?
So what changed between, like, did all that, there was a miscommunication on the forms that need to be done and the process, but the process was the same. It wasn't. So what did Craig do that mitigated all of that? Because if he did, was he the only one who knew all the forms that you needed? And so did not all the forms were not all the forms being used during Craig's time?
So what happened was the DSU turned into the middleman as opposed to the person who gives the final sign off.
Okay.
So that was like, I think, where the key issue was, where paperwork would come to the DSU desk, we'd do what we could or what we were supposed to do, and then hand it over to the university club for their final sign off. But in between that communication with us and the university, and between the societies and us, we were not able to tell the societies what they needed because we weren't being told what we needed. And so no one knew what was going on, except maybe...
the easy solution would just remove the DSU and people go straight to the U Club.
And that is what we've been advocating for since the very beginning.
Okay.
And so...
Why has that been so hard? Because that's, honestly, I figured that out in like 3 seconds.
Yeah. And so that was kind of like, you know, the conversation we were having with the administration, where we're like, you know, we're here to like make this process happen and like move it forward, but it's like very much stuck in these like ways. So like, please tell us what the changes are. And that's what we were asking for at the beginning, just like, let us know what the changes are. I mean, we went to the Alcohol Advisory Committee. We went to Verity, who's like the chair of the Alcohol Advisory Committee. Then we went to the interim president at the time, Terry Balser. And everyone was kind of just like, nope, everything is fine. Listen to the direction of the license designate. And the license designate really wasn't giving us
the easy answer to that one is I don't think any of them knew what was going on either.
100%. And then we finally brought it to the Board of Governors, and that was like in October. So this has been going on from June to October.
Yeah,
and it's been like the DSU trying to deal with and like get events happening. And so probably at this time, students are probably like aware of like events, you know, alcohol kind of being like weird and like events not being processed and people like getting frustrated by this. And that's kind of like the general where students were at that time. So then we went to the Board of Governors and we were like, hey, so the DSU is no longer going to be involved in this process. We're like removing ourselves, the solution that you came up with in like 3 seconds. We're removing ourselves from the process. You don't actually need us in the process. And we're going to be sending people straight to you and then you can like approve their events. So we were just like, we're removing ourselves. You deal with the students directly. You're the license designate. This is actually what makes the most sense. And we can like no longer be involved in this process and aren't required to really.
Okay.
And so then that went to the Board of Governors, which is like the highest body of decision making in the university. And so then the next day we got a hand delivered letter from Verity on behalf of Ivan, where alcohol was suspended effective immediately. And then Ivan went on vacation the next day. So we were like, what? And they were like, sorry, no one can answer any of your questions because Ivan's gone. And we're like, yeah.
That's
for a large part of this. Did you feel misunderstood?
Misunderstood.
Like from where you were, like with like what the public was seeing and like what like all like behind the scenes. Like, did you feel like what you were trying to fight for was kind of just being overshadowed at all?
Yeah, and I think this wasn't even really an advocacy issue per se. We were kind of just like, this system/structure doesn't make sense, where we're actually just approving things day of for events, and that makes absolutely no sense. So for the betterment of everyone in this process, the DSU is stepping out so that folks can, you know, talk directly to the license designate and get that information processed, so that they can actually hopefully create an internal process. And our ask throughout this whole thing was like, A, create an internal process that makes sense and communicate it with everyone, and B, just give us information so we can like share that. And so that's been like ignored throughout. And so then when the suspension happened, we were like, oh my God, why?
What I don't understand is sort of that your solution makes sense. But when it came out, when everyone knew, it was presented as a refusal to comply by the terms or the policies. That's what we all heard.
Yeah.
So where did it go from, we're just going to send you guys, the people, like the society, so that they can go straight to you because we don't know what's going on, to we don't want to comply by the rules, we refuse to follow yours because you're asking ridiculous rules. Like that's because that's the message we all heard.
And I think that's where politics plays in, where the university spun it in that way to make it seem like we said that we weren't going to follow the rules, but we've never said we were not going to follow the rules. And so that's kind of why, like, the day of, we kind of put all of our, like, documentation up on the website, as well as, like, our statement being like, this is a process we went through. Here's all the documentation with, like, the dates showing how we talked to the university. Here's what we said to the Board of Governors. And we never said we're not going to comply with the alcohol policy. That's never been something we've said. But what we did say is we're removing ourselves from this process after having tried to support the license designate in their new position for various months, and it just hasn't been working. And we've been asking for an internal process to be created so that, you know, this can be made sense and that it's communicated to students and to everyone so we can actually work together, and that hasn't been happening. And so therefore we are stepping back so that the license designate can do their role and play the job of creating that policy and that structure. And so the other piece too is that if any changes were to happen with the alcohol policy or the process of how alcohol happens, it had to be brought to the Alcohol Advisory Committee. And so nothing was actually brought to the Alcohol Advisory Committee. And so that would technically be our seat to be able to like understand what's going on. And so changes were happening. Nothing was brought to Alcohol Advisory Committee. We were confused. Students were confused. I'm sure the university was confused. And through our constant trying to be like, hey, please make a process. Please make a process. Please, let's like do something because this is like unsustainable. And then our final, step after going through like the levels from advisory committee to Verity to Terry was to the Board of Governors and just be like, we're stepping out of this process. And then the university was like, DSU said they were not going to follow the policy. And I'm like, never said that.
Okay.
And then they were gone for a whole week. And like, that's the other thing that like really like upset me at that time, where if Ivan Joseph, if Verity called me or texted me or sent me an email, as they do all the time, or Ivan specifically, we could have clarified right then and there. No, we have absolutely no intention of not following the policy. What we're saying is we're stepping out of this process. But instead of doing
the communication process between you, the societies and the administration.
For the approval process.
Okay, approval process.
Yeah, because the approval process.
It's not that you don't want to comply by the policies and fill out the forms.
Yeah.
And like get them to Verity. Sorry, not Verity, to Jazz Tate or the U Club manager. It's you do not want to be the middleman for the societies and the administration.
And it's not even not wanting to be the middleman per se, but it's like the license designate's job is to maintain that like system and process and structure of like moving things forward.
Right.
And so when that was taken away from us, which is like a breach of the alcohol policy in and of itself, when that was taken away from us, our ability to do anything was also taken away in that sense. So we couldn't change the system and make it make sense even if we wanted to, because we didn't have that power anymore. So that was taken from us. And so we said, we actually cannot do anything in this process. We've been trying to help you move it along. But when you took that license designation, you broke your own policy and you
locked us out of
decision making or like having any role in this process.
So I guess the only thing that you could have done differently would be join the like sort of cooperate with the administration and to build a new sort of better policy making process or system. Did you try that at all, or was it just, can you give us answers? And obviously they didn't know what was going on, because my opinion on institutions is that they're messed up because they're run by humans and humans are flawed, and it's just a whole big shit show. So that was happening. Only the manager at the UCO would have known anything. Ivan doesn't know anything about the procedures. Would it have been easier to go to Ivan, to go to Janice, and like, let's work together to create a better system, instead of me expecting you to do something that you don't know how to do and I don't know how to do? Let's try and did you try doing that?
Yeah, we definitely tried that. And so I think the other piece too is like we lost the designation in July, and then the suspension happened in October. So July, August, September, October, that was 4 months where we were doing that work that students weren't necessarily privy to. And so we actually were doing that work for those 4 months to try to make that make sense.
So what happened for the Dalfest beer sort of liquor caged off? Because from what I understand is, according to Ivan, it was a missing forms. Like the forms weren't being... It was like a security check and fire marshal check, and the liquor. The bartenders didn't have their server's license on them. Was that an intentional sort of you just said you don't want to breach a policy. You don't breaching any policies, but what happened there? Like.
Yeah. So for those forms and things, in particular for that event, we produced everything that has been like produced in terms of paperwork and stuff of years past, and we were being requested to get information that we've never like actually provided before. So for example, with the security, we were asked, I can't remember if it was like for the invoice or it was some paperwork we were asked to get for security. And so we hit up like the folks and we were like, hey, can you like send us a thing that you always send us? And they were like, okay, here you go. And so they gave us that. And then we submitted that. And the university was like, no, that's not it. We need something else. And we're like, what other thing? And then they told us and we were like, okay. And then we go back to the people and we're like, can we get this thing? And they're like, oh, this has never been asked for before. And we're like, okay, well, we just need
the
it.
people being this, the people doing security.
Security, yeah.
These
Shadow.
people-
So this
okay.
this
Okay.
is in our communication with Shadow Security.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't remember if it was like the invoice or like what it specifically.
That's for
exactly
certain
was.
documentation as proof that the security check happened, or as because like the vibe that I got was they needed the security check for the safety of the students. So this was contingent on the safety of the students, but if it was an invoice or some sort of like payment method, I guess that wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah. So I guess for Dalfest itself, we like planned it and organized it in the same way we did like O Week.
Yeah,
Like
it all happens in one big.
Yeah, it all happens in like one big planning, and like VPSL does the logistics and stuff, and then the director of operations helps with like the background, fire marshal, all of those pieces. And so we coordinated everything as it has been done for many, many years. The DSU has been doing the same event for many years. We have that documentation. And so we submitted all of that paperwork. And like usually that like signing off of the license happened in-house because we had the license designate in-house. And when the license designate was no longer in-house, the new license designate decided that they wanted to have all these other requirements that we fulfilled, or they were given to us. And like in the same way that society's things were shifting, ours was also shifting, where it was like, we'd give them this thing and they're like, oh, it's not this, it's actually we need this. And so it was like pieces of paper at the end of the day. And that's a thing that I think I often talk about, where pieces of paper aren't going to keep students safe. Having a piece of paper with whether it's signed, or like whatever the piece of paper says, having that sit in a folder is not going to keep students safe. So we had security booked. We had the fire marshal situation all cleared up. Like all of those things to actually have Dalfest with the beer tent happen was done. We had, the setting up of the stage. Like everything was done as required for safety standards. And like the DSU actually, I think, prioritizes student safety around alcohol a lot more than the university does, because their current policy is to kick out students from residence if they are drinking, which we saw at O Week was like a huge, really put students in precarious situations. And the university's response was to have Dal Security just follow them around as they went from residence to residence getting kicked out. Were you there that day when the students had that random party? It was supposed to be like capture the flags in the dark, and all the students just like jumped out.
During O Week?
Yeah. There was like a low-key like mob at one point where students were like spraying alcohol in the air, and all just like someone had like a huge ass speaker on their shoulder.
I worked during the nights during O Week, so I remember it's all like a vague cloud, to be honest with you. I slept maybe 7 hours in 4 days. It was messed up.
Yeah. But yeah, so like currently the university's policies around like alcohol and student safety are just not in any way, shape, or form where they should be. Students should not be being kicked out when they're drunk and just made to like wander the streets, because they were literally wandering the streets.
Okay, that's absurd. It's their house that they're paying for.
Yeah.
So wait, so like if they're having a party that they're not in that residence, they kick them out, or even if they live in that residence, they kick them out?
I don't know exactly the things. This
Okay.
is like Ruby would probably be able to tell you, give you more around like
we're going on a
residence
really
things.
big tangent because I've been on this for a long time.
But yeah, basically alcohol in residence and like universities' actionables on how they deal with like drunk students is like in no way a harms reduction approach. A harms reduction approach is give students snacks, give students water. You like make sure they're like home and in bed, and like you check in on them. I know we had a few years ago in 2015, we had the death of the student here in residence. Because students were too afraid to go tell their RAs that they had a drunk, one of their classmates were intoxicated, and then therefore decided to like leave it. And so we know what happens when
she was it alcohol poisoning, correct?
It was alcohol poisoning, yeah. And so we do know what happens when students are made to, made to feel like alcohol is like a contraband that they have to like hide from. And so we strive at the DSU on a harms reduction approach, which is like give people snacks, give people water, like check in on them, cut them off if they're too drunk. And so our staff are like well trained at the Greywood and Tea Room to do that work. And we've been working with shadow security for years, and so there's like a really good relationship with their supervisors and stuff around how we deal with our students when these situations happen. And so Dalfest would have went fine with the tents. We were actually hoping to have like a whole area where students could have, if they needed to like throw up, like have little spaces and like have those little like all the different things like water and like snacks.
Privacy.
Yeah, and just like a place where students can like be safe.
Like a med tent,
yeah,
basically.
Exactly. And so we had all that planned and in the works and booked. And because of pieces of paper that were not provided at a timely manner by the university, they cut the tent.
How I understood it and how I see it myself, if the piece of paper are the proof that the safety is being met, sort of as you fulfilled, like in case of someone who cared less about the students than you do. It's sort of that fail safe of, are you doing your job? Yes, so this is proof. Like multiple people can prove that this is a safe environment. That's what the paper is. But if the requirement was contingent on something that wasn't dependent on student safety, that I don't get, because the paper isn't equivalent to the student safety. It's the sort of the proof
of
yeah
right.
So I understand where if the proof wasn't being met, so like security check and fire marshal, like those are law requirements for pulling off an event, but they're met, and yet they weren't.
And so I think a perfect example of what paperwork they were looking for that we didn't have at the time was the Greywood and Tea Room staff smart serves.
Right, that's it's not a law in Nova Scotia. That's the only thing the administration does to go over and beyond.
Yeah, and so all of our staff who work at the Greywood and Tea Room have those smart serves, and the university wanted us to produce all of them. And so we, reached out to all the staff, being like, "Hey, can we get the smart serves?" And STEM, lost their smart serve certificate, or submitted it at the time when they got the job to be able to get it, but now actually don't know where it is.
And it was a day before.
And so this is the week of.
Okay. The week of. Okay.
Yeah, the week of, or I can't remember the timelines exactly. But we were asked, to produce their smart serves. But it's all of our staff are smart serve certified. And a lot, we were able to collect everyone who had theirs on file or had a picture. We took those and submitted them, but there was a group of people who didn't. And then Ivan's why don't you just call up SmartServe and tell them to give you the documentation? And we're we tried, and they don't have that, and that's not an actual thing that's stored in that way.
It's private information. They just send you the email. If you I know when I got my liquor license, I have a liquor license on myself. You can serve alcohol on me. But when I got my bartender's license, I got an email of it. So I have a physical copy. I keep in my wallet all the time. But then I have an email of it. I just can go to mail, pull it out. Did they not get? Why was it so hard to get?
Different people, different circumstances. Don't want to get into their stuff. But I actually, that was in September. And then when the alcohol suspension happened in October, was it?
I think so. This year's been a blur, to be honest with you.
One of the contingencies to get the alcohol suspension lifted was to get all their smart serves. So then I was the one messaging every single Greywood and Tea Room staff being send me your smart serve. And folks who couldn't get a physical copy wouldn't be able to work in the Greywood until they were able to get us their copy. And so I had a whole spreadsheet where I was this person has it, will send it to me. This person is looking for it, will get back to me.
How many staff are there between Tea Room and Greywood I guess you don't worry about the wardie, do you?
No, we have nothing to do with the King's Wardie. 40 up to maybe 50.
Yeah, you need a spreadsheet for that.
People come and go.
There's a lot of part-time staff, that's for sure.
Yeah. And shout out to all the staff who were on it and were trying to, doing their best to get the paperwork in. And I was able to over the 1.5 week period compile all that together. Meanwhile, Ivan didn't tell me he needed this until like after his 1 week vacation that he got to take.
Oh, that's
lucky.
nice. So
lucky,
you just
lucky
got
boy.
shit on for a week.
Yeah, so it was like a whole week of we had known nothing about the suspension, why we were suspended, anything other than like the letter they gave us. And they gave us the same letter that they sent out to all the students being like, the DSU's refusing to comply. And we're like, no, we're not. We never said we were. If you think we've refused to, like, here, we are 100% here saying we're complying. And they're just like, oh, sorry, Ivan's away and he's the only one who wants to deal with this, him personally, because it is under his portfolio. So the only thing to respectfully do is wait for him to come back. Meanwhile, students are DMing me and telling me, like, I'm a stupid idiot. And we're just getting, like, shit on in all these different ways.
I remember I saw you. I was like, "Come here, let me give you a hug."
It was rough. It was rough, and I'm like, people I don't know, people I do know, people who like campaigned for me, or like, you know, we talked and they were like, "You're gonna do some great things. We're so excited to have you." Everyone just turned, and it was like an immediate like, the university said you guys aren't following policy, so fuck you. You suck. You're not following policy, and I'm like, ah.
It's when that's the hard part for when you're doing big change, is that stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
I guess, were you like, because you must have known something was going to go wrong with the restructuring, whether it was this or that. Did you come into the headspace that you're going to have to put out a major fire, because with big change comes like big instability, right? Did you expect it to happen?
Alcohol suspension, no. I've mentioned this to Ivan before, where I'm like, Ivan, this whole thing could have been avoided. Like a quick phone call. And that's how like politics works at the end of the day when you're at those like higher levels with the university. It was a power thing. It was definitely a power thing. We made them look bad at the Board of Governors. We made Ivan look bad at the Board of Governors because the license is under his name. And so then retaliation there was suspension of everything. And it was like, you know, part them covering their asses to make sure, you know, they didn't get in trouble or figure out what was going on. But another part was you did this, we do that. We have the power to. So yeah,
okay.
that was fun.
So there was, like, it must have taken a lot of guts to pull off a restructuring after, years of like it being in consideration. Like, how many, like, I know like so many executives before you have been considering it, like, and like it comes up like, no, it's too much work. It's not, we can't pull it off. And you did. You were like, I don't know how many executives came before you that wanted to do a restructuring. This isn't a new thing. I'll clarify that. But the only way it was pulled off is if the entire executive wanted to do it. Like, was it hard to do the restructuring, to get the sort of the approval for the restructuring? Because I know that's usually what holds people back, like the executive. I mean, or did you find like the whole executive was already on board for it, like right off the bat?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm like very fortunate. Like, I've, you know, heard of many years in the past where DSU exec didn't even like speak to each other. Like, they'd be like on exec ridiculous. Together and they did not speak to each other. And that's just like, you know, personal issues folks had, or like different like political beliefs or like ideologies or like visions for the student union, yada yada yada. But I think us as an exec, like one of my favorite things about this executive is that we like work as a team, and like we come together, and like, you know, we're in charge of such, you know, huge mandates, 19,000 students, like thousands and thousands of dollars. Like, we have a huge responsibility on campus, and for us to like come together in this way and be like, okay, we all have like a united vision for the university and for the student union and for like Dalhousie. We're all working towards building an equitable future. How do we make that happen? And how do we like put aside our own personal quibs and, squabbles and personality differences and like really come together and like fulfill that mandate of what we want to do for students. And I love my team. Shout out to Hassan and Isa and Ruby and Callista. We call ourselves Dream Team. We truly are. We truly are a dream team.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So that, I hope to everyone listening, clarifies that whole fiasco. I think it does pretty much on your end, because we heard what the administration said. We understand what should have been done. We understand what did happen. So I think I want to move past that because there's not much to talk about anymore. The one thing I did ask you about, because that a lot of people assumed that the restructuring was a direct affiliation with the CFS. Do you want to put that to rest? Because people are like, oh, the restructuring for the CFS. Do you want to talk about that? Because I know it's not true.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess, So, do people, like, I don't know. My whole thing is, like, everything is just, like, misinformation and people, like, not having, like,
well, that's what we're doing here. We're setting it straight, all right? That's
not
exactly
having,
what we're here for.
The full understanding of, like, what different things are. So I guess, did we restructure for the CFS? No.
There you go. You heard it here first.
No, had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with that in any way, shape, or form. So I guess, is there any other follow-up questions?
Yeah, so...
I don't even know where to start.
No. And then, so what is the CFS?
Ooh, okay.
Because
so,
a lot of people just assume it's a...
I think that's, Okay, so the CFS is the Canadian Federation of Students. So it's a national organization that unites students across Canada to advocate for student issues. And so right now there are two main organizations in Canada that do that, so that they like have their membership are other student unions. So there's the Canadian Federation of Students, and there's the Canadian Alliance of Students Association. So
that one is in
CFS
though, right?
and CASA, I think, are the two. And so in Nova Scotia, Dalhousie is the only university that isn't part of any organization.
King's included? King's included?
Yeah, so King's is part of the CFS.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, it is? They already are?
Yes.
Okay.
King's is part of the CFS. NASCAD's part of the CFS. I think Mount Allison is part of CASA. SMU is part of CASA. So
it's like a war of student associations.
Yeah.
There's a lot we don't know, folks.
So every student union other than the DSU is a part. Fun fact, the DSU was a founding member of both CASA and the CFS.
Really?
Yep. Wow. Founding members.
How does that work? And we're not part of either?
Yeah, so we left both of them.
Okay.
Yes.
I feel, from what I understand, the biggest struggle with the CFS is being able to leave them. And,
we've done it before. We created it and then we left.
Okay. Do you know why? Out of curiosity, it must have been like years before.
Yeah, this is like in the 19 something.
Because it's like I think the CFS has been around for at least like 20, 30 years. Yeah. That's crazy.
So that happened. We were part of CASA. I think we left in like 2007. And so I, as being part of the DSU, I've like been aware of both the existence of CASA and the CFS, and like understanding that relationship of student unions uniting across the country through these two different organizations.
We can go into what does the CFS do for Dalhousie students. So what does it do in general?
So the CFS, as is CASA, is like a member-driven organization that unites students across their membership and across the country to advocate for their issues, provide services, advocate services. I think those are like the two main pieces. But what's interesting about these like external organizations is that they are invited to seats with the government. So both provincial and federal. They have like a working relationship at that like national level. And also provide various like services for their student unions.
What kind of services?
So I don't know too much about CASA's current services, but the CFS. One thing they like. So they have like low key services and then like high. Like there's all.
Their main. So I know their main priority is to make school like at CFS makes tuition free. That's their main goal. So
so it's an advocacy.
So that's their final goal. So a lot of things that they do are sort of driven towards that. So that's like their big stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then what are the small services that students would see more on campus?
Yeah. So for example, they provide. Do you know the agendas that the DSU prints out? So the DSU is able to do a lot of its services in house. But the agenda printing and like creation is something that CFS would provide for like all of its services across the country. And so that's like an example of a service that
odd example, to be honest with you. It's like the one like the scheduler at the beginning that would
the agendas. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's like a student service, and that's like a student service that we already provide for our students because we have like the capacity to like develop and create it and stuff. But that's like one thing.
But some universities don't.
A lot of student unions don't. So like we're actually pretty like lucky in the fact that we're like big enough to provide a lot of like these services in-house. Other services would be advocacy support. So for like the DAL Not Bound campaign that we talked about a few times. And also, fun fact, our graduate students are CFS members. I don't know if folks know that.
Our graduate students?
Graduate students, yeah. Dalhousie graduate students are.
Oh, just the graduating class? Or what?
No.
Like the graduate, like the...
Dalhousie, so DAGS, the Dalhousie Graduate Student Association.
Yeah, but not undergrads is what I mean.
Yeah, so not undergrads. So
that's interesting.
And so...
They have their own union?
So they have their own association.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah. And so they are a member, and so as part of the tuition increases, they were able to get the CFS to support in that advocacy and that like running of a campaign to do the Not DAL Bound. And so it was like graduate students working with the CFS and then like undergrad students working with like the DSU to do that like advocacy piece around that. Other services they provide. They have like various like conferences that they hold and run, and that's like, you know, connecting students across the country to be able to like engage with each other. They have like an indigenous, it's called the Circle, I believe. So it's like an indigenous and Inuit students collective, and like I think it's one of like the firsts to happen like across the country that like brings students together to talk about their issues and like really do some like advocacy work moving forward.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah. So it's just like kind of in the same way with the DSU is like, you know, what do we provide? We provide supports for students. What does that look like? Well, what supports do students need? I think the CFS kind of does that like.
So it does that for the unions. So it's like a union of the unions.
Yeah, unions and students.
So I guess a lot of the fear with the CFS that comes with the CFS comes from the sort of relationship that they had with other universities. And a gentleman named Titus Gregory put out like a 340-page document about all the things that the CFS has done in the past. And I'll be honest, it's pretty scary. It's pretty scary. There's a lot of articled, it's like a dozen cases where the CFS sued people for like trying to leave the CFS. Sued unions, not people. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So they're offering student advocacy, but they're also will sue you if you try and leave the student advocacy group. Is that something that you've noticed within the CFS, or like there's a reason behind that, or is that just somebody a student like is that unexplainable?
Yeah, I guess I like maybe not the most like well versed in like the legal issues of the CFS over the past few years. And I can only really speak from like my experience and like what I've witnessed and like engaged with the CFS and seen like the work they've done. I do know CBU was one school that was brought up and like is in our
that's like the one province. That's like the one that people bring up the most.
Yeah, and I think
but it's like all from PEI to BC, Ontario, Saskatchewan. Definitely butchered that name. But all of so many universities have. I think Carleton is in a current. They tried to get out, and then they were slapped with a 5-year contract where they couldn't get out, try to get out, or make any referendums to get out. I guess the fear, and I cannot bring any bias here because the CFS does do a lot of good. Like in New Brunswick, I think they completely reduced the fees. They put a cap on the fees. Am I right about that?
Newfoundland.
Newfoundland, and then they also Newfoundland has the lowest tuition in Canada.
Yeah.
And they also in Quebec, they've reduced the fees there, so Quebec's the second lowest in Canada. Both completely CFS unions in like almost entirely in the province. So I can't deny that they're good. What does scare me about this, I want to get your opinion on it, is how they, because we're prospect members of joining.
Yeah. So
you must have talked about this. On the policies, when you join the CFS, you sort of have to comply with the CFS's regulation, the way they process things. For example, when you get into the CFS, it takes, I think, 10% of the population for a vote in, but 15 to 20% to get out. And so there's these small things that make it extremely hard that are built in the CFS policies that make it hard for the student unions and the student body to have full autonomy over the decisions. Did you notice that when you're going over the sort of prospect, like the prospect membership?
I guess, well, for DSU's prospective membership, it was like a vote at council that like situated us in this prospective membership. And I guess I don't necessarily see the, like, entering and leaving the CFS in terms of like their policies, like they're an organization, so I guess they can decide how people leave and how people join, like that's like within their right. But like this conversation of like, does it take away our autonomy? I don't see that, and I don't know where the fear of that is coming from, because we are like, you know, fully autonomous as a student union to like do what we want. I know one of our council members like checked in with the CFS to be like, you know, if you guys have like advocacy stances on these, do we also have to take on these stances? If you guys have, you know, if you're doing a campaign, do we also have to take on the campaign? And the answer to that is like, no.
Okay,
we can like pick and choose what we want from the CFS and like make it fit to our structure. And so kind of like when I was talking about the agendas earlier, we don't need the agendas, so we're not going to use the agendas. But maybe, you know, we need support in running campaigns because, you know, you talked about students not knowing too much about food insecurity on campus. And so like awareness campaigns are something that the DSU hasn't been doing in the past, has attempted a few times and just like not done too well. And so those are like supports that we can like bring in that will actually be beneficial to our population.
Right.
And so in terms of like the policy to enter, it's like a democratic process. You like vote in. And so I've been, you know, when students ask me like, what are your thoughts on the CFS? I'm like, well, I can tell you me personally, Aisha, but as DSU president, I'm saying reach out to like actual sources, aka reach out to the CFS, Nova Scotia, reach out to student unions who are part of the CFS in our province, reach out to folks you know, and like do the research to figure out if the CFS would benefit you and your constituents. If it's a yes, vote yes. If it's a no, vote no. Students have the right and like 100% should be making the decision. And should be making the decision that fits right for students. And this is really about like bringing that like option to students from like my perspective, where it's like we get to vote if we want to join it or not. We're in it for like a free year. If folks have seen the benefits, I'm glad. If folks haven't seen the benefits, like do like look into it maybe a little bit more. But maybe you've seen like so many negatives and you're like, oh my God, no, I don't want to be part of the CFS. And then like vote no and tell your friends to vote no. And like everyone should be making like informed decisions.
I
like,
completely
that's what
agree
we're here
on that.
for.
100%.
And I think in terms of like the policy of like coming in and leaving, I think those are, you know, conversations that like should and like can be had, and I'm like glad students are like engaging in that. But I think I don't know, like my whole sense is like democracy is like fundamentally broken. Like when you think about like how many people vote and like
and how much information goes around.
How much information goes around, how much like fake news goes around. When you think about even like the federal elections, like how many people voted in the federal elections.
Like Michael, like in the U.S., Bloomberg's literally running on a bank. Like that's anyway. We're not gonna go into that.
So like it's like, you know, democracy has like many flaws, and so we also unfortunately inherit those flaws in our own democratic processes.
Right.
And so I cannot save or solve those.
Fair enough.
We try our best to like inform students.
I guess so. Back in what was it? It was last semester. There was we were gonna DSU tried to pull a referendum, whether or not they want to. What was it? It was a referendum for prospective membership, or was it? I know there was a referendum, but it never met a quorum.
Oh, AGM.
AGM.
That
Yeah.
was AGM. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was referendum for. What was it for?
So an AGM is our like 1 year, every year the DSU has an AGM where we present our financial statements for the past year, where execs do like a report on like what they've been doing to the membership. And then also our bylaws are open for revision if folks wanted to. And so the bylaw revision process would be bylaw policy review committee. You bring it to council. It's posted like, I think it's like a month beforehand, yada, yada, yada. And then at the actual AGM, you'd like vote on those things. And so we didn't meet quorum for a DSU AGM, which just meant we couldn't like vote on anything, but no bylaws were brought forward anyway. So there was nothing to vote on.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that really speaks to, the DSU hasn't met quorum for years now. And so it really does.
Really?
Yeah. It's been a few years. I think the last quorum we met was 2016.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And so that like just kind of speaks to the like lack of interest students are like having in like the DSU and the governing bodies and structures that make all these decisions. And so, yeah, I don't know. I feel like this year is like one thing that we've done is gotten the students like, ooh, DSU, what do you do? And I'm like, hopefully everyone comes forward with like, good intentions and like are actually here for the students. And I'm like excited to see like people who like care about students and are here to like engage with student life coming forward and getting involved, because we should be getting quorum. Like we definitely should.
Well, the one thing that I found off about that whole situation, and one thing that, I mean, we can push at the end of your term, so I'm not going to ask you to do that right now, but there's definitely a lack of information about those things, because as far as I knew, there was maybe an Instagram story and a tweet about the AGM, which is one of the most fundamental, like, sort of regulatory things for the students, for the DSU and the DSU to inform the students. I think the AGMs are very important. But the DSU's role in that is, I don't think it's been met really well. Definitely could use a lot more advertising. I only found out about it because I walked in the sub at the right time. And that was it. And I was like, oh, that's when they, okay, cool. I sat down and I was like, okay, no, I could have totally missed that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Our like comms strategy, and like I'm not a marketing student or a management student in any way, shape, or form, so like I'm like, what is a comms strategy? We just tell students and then they show up, right? So that
if
definitely,
they're looking for it, they'll find it, but if they're not, screw them.
Well, we try. So yeah, I think like student engagement is like a huge piece. It's like, how do you engage students? How do you get the information out? How do you reach students where they're at? And my experience as a student organizer through my 4 years here at the DSU has always been like doing that on the ground. And that was possible when, I was like the president of the Dalhousie Arts and Social Science Society. So I just had to talk to like art students, or when I was running the Black Indigenous People of Color Caucus. And so my job was to like outreach to like Black Indigenous and students of color. But when it's like 19,000 students and I'm one person, I'm like, oh my God, how do I
Was there a
how do I
position within the
engage with
DSU
people?
that is for like advertising DSU events?
So we have our communications coordinator.
Yeah.
That position right now is currently vacant. But we have our new person coming in March 1st. Yay.
Awesome.
So yeah, so that office has kind of just been like unstaffed for a while, which is like why comms haven't been the greatest. But I'm like really, really looking forward to and like really trying to figure out what are ways we can engage students so that I can like leave that information for the next year. Obviously, I'm not going to start like a huge comms campaign or like whatever. But really being like, okay, these, these work in these ways, like Instagram stories only get you this far. The website, we're in the process right now of like revamping our website. And I think that's like another place where a lot of our energy has been going to, where it's like, if we have like a good website, we can like put the information there and the students can engage. So we're building that up right now, but it's like, how do you engage 19,000 students?
I think the best way, and this is just from my own observation.
Yeah, please share.
It would be
love feedback.
Sort of, how like in like the like governmental politics.
Yes.
If they want to say anything, they pull on a press conference, and the press conference gets some information out.
Yes.
The problem with that is the press conference, the press has a sort of power to twist what you say.
Yeah.
Granted, But if you want to build an informed audience, sort of the Dal Gazette, the Watch, the like all those like campus news sources, they have a responsibility to inform. I know they've been doing a very good job on it when it comes to what they're reporting on what's happening in council meetings, especially recently. So if you, what I would do, I mean, other than the podcast, because that's like a long form and no one wants to listen about what a council meeting was about the same length as council meeting, to get like, all right, this is like a 15-20 second video of, hey, this is what we did today. This is what we did. If you want more information, check the video of the full thing. Simple as that. They put it out, then they match that with the tweets that they had, the live tweets that they put out, and then everyone can share that. It's easy to see. So simple. And it's literally like 15-second video. It'll be so easily accessible.
I love video content and like audio content, and that's like a huge thing for me. Where I was like, I want to do a podcast because I like
phone. It's
I love
your phone. It was so easy.
Okay, the issue has been in like over the summer and also over the fall semester when we're having all of the student backlash is just like the fear of students like attacking us on these social medias. Like I've had people like search my personal social media and then DM me being like, you're actually like a horrible. I had a known rapist DM me and tell me I'm a horrible person. And I'm like, sorry, you're a rapist. You're a horrible person. But I obviously didn't respond because I was like, I don't even know what like a backlash of this looks like. But it's like the entitlement of people to like be behind their keyboards and be like haters online and like trolls online is so scary. And like, you know, last year or years in the past, the DSU has had executives getting like rape threats and death threats and, you know, all of these things from students. And I've gotten a few really like scary emails in the past, and also DMs. And so it's like putting ourselves out there via video.
Sorry, are we? Is there somebody else before the studio?
Recording?
Yeah, we're pretty.
So yeah, like there's like, you know, the for me the personal fear of like putting my face and myself out there and then having everyone be like, you suck, you're an ugly bitch.
It's one of those positions, the sacrifices, right?
Is kind of like nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
But then in situations where we're not dealing with this shit, like this semester, for example, I'm like, yes, I'm here for it. I'm here to like be all over these things. And if people comment, I'm like, whatever.
Right. It's one of those things where it's when a lot of people know you, a lot of people have opinions. I think ever since the podcast came out, I've already heard somebody like basically having beef with me about something that I didn't do, and like I don't even know the guy, and I literally we started the podcast like a week ago, and already someone's like, oh, this guy, he posts like too much stories on Instagram. I'm like, bruh, it hasn't even been 4 days, so I can't even imagine. But it's I sort of I know that with when you're in the spotlight a lot of people see you, a lot of people build opinions. It's hard to manage that, but I think we have to start wrapping this up because it's
100%.
literally 2 hours in.
Time flies.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Aisha.
Yeah, no.
It was an absolute pleasure. I hope it feels good to you to clear up some stuff. Hopefully, if anyone has any issues with things that were misinformed, they can come to this podcast and get that cleared up. And I hope that people listening, that now they understand the perspective of the DSU and Aisha, and hope we straightened it all out. My brain is completely fried right now. Thanks again. Is there anything that's happening in the near future that you want people to know about?
Ooh, we have Afrofest happening February 28th at the Greywood from 7 to close, so come through for that. That's going to be a great party. Keep an eye out for Last Class Bash. It's going to be a little special.
It's gonna be
It's
fun.
always good.
Yeah,
I love Last
that's
Class
going to be fun,
Bash.
so make sure to get out there. And I think I have office hours every Monday that are open to anyone to pop by. It's like part of the presidential committee. So anyone can pop by if you have any cool ideas you want to work on. I've had folks come in and they're like, oh, I want to do this thing. And I'm like, make a society. And they're like, oh, fuck yeah, I'll make a society. And it's like great to see students like bringing their passions in and like being able to like figure out where to put their ideas to like make it work and move it forward. So yeah, if anyone wants to drop by, it's 4 to 6 or 5 to 7, depending on if I have Senate that week. Yeah, and also follow me on Snapchat because I do little cute videos on Snapchat all the time. So
That's a good point.
yeah.
Where can they find you again? Like what building? Or what area for the office hours?
Oh, for the office hours would be in the second floor. Just check in with the member services desk when you get there. And then for Snapchat at Dal Student Union.
Awesome.
There you go.
Yeah.
Also, elections are coming up soon.
Yes.
I think the nomination period ends today. So
Yes.
by after reading week, we should be hearing about the candidates. Are you excited to see who could be replacing you?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see like what folks come forward with and like what they want to speak about. And I, encourage anyone to come forward and like chat with the current execs in those roles. I think you learn so much from the people who've been there before you, and you can really like filter your ideas through that. So yeah, if anyone is running for president and wants to chat with me, come through.
You have to fight it to the death. If you can kill me, you can get the presidency.
Oh no, I'm gone. I'm so gone.
All right, thank you so much, Aisha.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I hope you have a good reading week.
Thank you. You
And-
too.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you saw, please leave a like and subscribe. You can also follow us at Setting It Straight Podcast on Facebook, Instagram. And I think that's it.
That's it. Also, if you want to check out older episodes or stay locked in and find new episodes, look for us on Spotify, Google Play, and Apple Music. Or, of course, you can stay and look at videos on YouTube. Thanks, guys.